Welcome. My name is Steve Kenzie. I am your moderator today. I'm the Executive Director of the UN Global Compact Network in the UK. Um, just to get us going, a little bit of housekeeping. Uh, today's presentation is in webinar mode, which means attendees will be muted and won't be able to show your video, but we very much want to hear from you. So we encourage you to use both the chat box and the Q&A box, and do try to use them for their named purposes. Chat in the chat box, but if you have a question for one of our panelists, then please do put it through the Q&A. Helps to keep us organized, and we are really keen to collect your questions. Our first speaker, we'll answer them in the session, and with the rest, we'll have a panel discussion at the end. And it'd be really great to have these collections, or these questions collecting there for us. The session is being recorded for your information. Now, what will we cover today? Firstly, in general, the role of business in combating climate change. Secondly, why and how SMEs can set science-based targets. The UN Global Compact, WWF and CDP Business Ambition for 1.5 degrees Celsius campaign, Making Global Goals Local Business 2021 conference in the Netherlands. And we've got a couple of fantastic examples of European SMEs that are stepping up to tackle the issue of climate change. And then we'll wrap up with some Q&A. We've got fantastic speakers to support this agenda. Firstly, Mr. Wiebe Dreyer, the chairman of the managing board of Rabobank, so a very important business leader in the Netherlands with great experience in this area. Wiebe, I will leave it to you and all of the speakers to introduce yourselves a little more fully. Next, we'll have Alexander Farsan, the global lead for science-based targets at the WWF. Then we'll have a brief video presentation from Sanda Ojambo, the CEO and Executive Director of the UN Global Compact. We'll then hear from Linda van Beek, the Executive Director of the Global Compact Network Netherlands, and then Mark Kudigan, the CEO of Ella's Kitchen, and Erwin Kotjans, the CEO of NUNNER Logistics. So very much looking forward to hearing from all of these fantastic speakers. Today's subject really, it couldn't be more critical. SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, represent in most countries the vast majority of the business community, and taken in aggregate, the number of employees, the turnover, the profits generated typically exceed the turnover and profits and employment generated by larger companies. And the dark side of that, though, is the negative impacts are often even worse in terms of climate and other environmental impacts, often because smaller companies are less, perhaps less scrutinized, but also because they're just challenged, and it is a very difficult, it's already a difficult challenge to run a small business in a system that is not really geared towards sustainability. So we're very fortunate to have two CEOs that are really making this central to their way they do business. And it's something that, an example that we really encourage small business owners in our audience to be inspired by. It's really critical that everybody take a lead, and these are companies that are finding competitive advantage in being sustainable, and we think that that's something that all companies can do. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to start hearing from the real experts in this, and so I'm going to hand over the mic to Mr. Dreyer from Rabobank. Wiebe, over to you.
Thank you, and I hope you're all Doing fine. It's obviously a challenging time to be speaking about this subject, as it is a challenging time for just about anything at this point in time. But I think it's very relevant and pertinent to talk about SMEs in particular in their relationship towards climate change and their role in climate change, and also the encouragement that they need and support that they need in order to do so. And I think Steve rightfully said, underscored the importance of SMEs and business in general, but I think today we're talking about SMEs in particular in driving the shift to a sustainable planet. I'm Wiebe Dreyer. I'm the CEO of Rabobank. I've been with Rabobank now 6 years. I'm an engineer by training, was a journalist, an advisor, and also played a role prior to Rabobank in the public domain, where I helped forge a large-scale energy transition agreement in the Netherlands, and that after that jumped to become the CEO of Rabobank. Why am I talking about this as a CEO of Rabobank? Because as a cooperative, we have a heritage and a legacy and origin in bringing together SMEs. And please permit me to talk a little bit about Rabobank, not because I want to give you an advertisement for it, but I'd love you to understand why we are so glued to the SME domain and why we think they are crucial to driving our mission, which is growing a better world together in achieving that mission. And so please don't take my words as by means of an advertisement, but by means of an understanding. What I want to talk about is essentially three things. Why are SMEs important? Two, why is it actually a win-win to be focusing on SMEs and the combating climate change issue? And then three, what does it take and how can we bring this frontier forward? So why are they important? And let me talk from the lens of Rabobank first. We are a cooperative bank founded over 120 years ago by bringing together SMEs in the agricultural space, bringing the stronger SMEs together with the weaker so that the money of the stronger could be used to invest in the weaker. And that is the foundation of a cooperative, but also it is the foundation that we still try to adhere to. We are in the Netherlands serving about 45% of all SMEs in the country. And in some segments, agriculture, 85% of the sector. And they're mostly SMEs in that case. So SMEs have been the foundation of this bank, and they have been significant to us over the years. Also, in the job creation space, SMEs create the majority of jobs. Where you look at the area of job creation, not so much the big companies, largely the smaller companies. Also, they can account for almost 50% of any economy's employment. So it is any standard, by any standard, this is an important segment also for us as a cooperative bank. And when we look forward as a cooperative bank and look in line with our mission, growing a better world together, it is core that we contribute to driving sustainable change in all of the client segments that we're in. We're doing it in the Netherlands, mostly SME, and we're doing it in the world of food, where we hit on the largest share of food, the biggest bank in the world in terms of financing the supply chain. So we're driving that sustainable shift in the food supply chain, and we are one of the leading leasing companies that is driving the world towards sustainable use of equipment and assets by means of leasing. Now let me jump to why SMEs are also attractive. Why is a win-win? And this is, I think, intriguing. And let me bring to you three lenses on this. One is, if you now would do a micro-analysis on any economy, and you would do data analysis, and you would understand where is the majority of growth, what is the attractive segments to pursue, you would find from detailed analysis on data that the attractive segment to serve within SMEs is the ones that are adhering to let's say the key shifts in sustainability, whether it's in food, whether it's in energy, whether it's in in resource or biodiversity, when you would tick on does this SME serve any of these goals, these global goals, and then correlate that to results, you'll see that the majority of growth actually sits in the domain of SMEs serving the segment. Second, if you look at the risk profile, the return profile, the attractiveness profile these days, you would do a micro-analysis on risk in a portfolio of SME companies, you will find that the companies the SMEs that are spending more of their energy on the energy transition or the food transition or any of the global goals that we have, you will see that their risk profile is a better risk profile. So from a return, growth, and a risk profile, the SMEs are actually on the frontier of attractiveness. So there is a win-win thought behind it. And finally, on the win-win side, if I touch base with our client base and I understand, I speak to these clients that are involved in either any of these subjects of transitions, you can see that they are getting great benefits from doing it, even if they're only touching a little bit of it. So for example, in the circular economy, if you go through a detailed exercise with small and medium-sized businesses and they adopt a small share of their business in true circular economy supply chains, the benefit they get from that is disproportionate. They could win 90% of their competitive bids if they only have 10% of their business in true circular propositions. That still swings the majority of their competitive bids. So it's quite obvious if you dive into the why should we look at SMEs. They are the big size of the economy. They are a big slice of what it takes in terms of employment and job creation. But also, if you dive in by serving them, you'll see that SMEs actually, there's a win-win in trying to drive the change at this point in time through sustainability by serving SMEs. At the same time, at this very moment, this is a challenge. Corona affects us all, affects the economy at large, affects almost all aspects of our societies these days. And SMEs are perhaps hardest hit and have vulnerabilities. And yes, they are supported by government policies and regulations so that they can actually survive the Corona crisis. But in surveys, you'll see that the first thing that goes out the door when they are thinking about survival, it is the investments involved with some of the major transitions that they have to go through. And so I think they're vulnerable at this point in time in particular. They are vulnerable, and therefore their role and their goal and their contribution to the shift is in peril. And therefore, at this point in time, we need to focus on them and focus on them by supporting them. And it's clear that as a bank of our stature and our nature, being the largest in SME in the Netherlands or the second largest as overall in the economy, finance plays a crucial role, and we do. Finance is important. Finance is a mechanism by which they can invest in these transitions, and finance can be a crucial lever. Also, small companies tend to be dependent on the larger ones, and the larger ones, they have now figured it out, that the Sustainable Development Goals are a key lever to profile, are a key lever to attach your strategy to, and they can then buy from SMEs. But still, the larger companies need to be cognizant of the fact that they're vulnerable. So finance can play a role, larger companies can play a role. And we, by the way, are spending a lot of efforts on specific incentives for SMEs to make the shift to the Sustainable Development Goals by providing them discounts, by reporting on their progress, by creating extra measures so that they can support. And I think large corporates should do. However, it is difficult to do it well. And I think we need more than just finance support of SMEs and individual large corporates to buy from SMEs. There's also a more collective action required, because many of the investments involved in the Sustainable Development Goals are investments that don't naturally fit with an individual SME to pursue. Let me take you through that logic for 1 minute and then close. First of all, these investments in the Sustainable Development Goals tend to have a long time horizon. The length of time is something that is a longer horizon than typical SMEs would pursue. and therefore it's very hard to get them to invest in it. Secondly, the risk profile tends to be of a higher uncertainty factor than, let's say, copying existing business that is not sustainable. And so in SMEs that want to do something, they typically have to be supported in terms of the risk profile of these investments. And finally, and this is a field where the science-based targets also plays a role, the benefits of these investments don't always materialize in financial terms. So let's say biodiversity loss reduction or CO2 reduction is not always an area where the benefits themselves are quantifiable in financial terms that a SME can help to get finance or to get a return that they can report on. So there is institutional or collective action needed to incentivize SMEs. And one of the things that, let me give you an example of this, where this plays out. Let's take the housing market, where we know what it takes to bring the world to the Paris Agreement in the housing market in terms of insulation and solar panel investments. SMEs typically tend to be the ones that do the installations, but individuals, house owners, are very reluctant to make these investments when there's not a collective incentive. So we need to organize the shift to more sustainable housing by collective action, by getting neighborhoods to shift to solar panel energy creation or other types of energy creation. We need to create collective incentives for a neighborhood to shift, and then the SMEs can typically jump on the bandwagon to pursue these installations, because that's where the SME typically sits. So we need to think about the Sustainable Development Goals and the collective action that it requires as an incentive to get SMEs to jump on the bandwagon and to be able to be successful in these fields. In the finance area, we need to find ways to de-risk the shifts that SMEs can make. And let me give you an example from the agricultural side. When a farmer wants to shift to a more sustainable way of producing, it takes about 3 to 5 years to fully gear towards the new practices. In those 3 to 5 years, this farmer is vulnerable. If there's a bad season, the crop fails, the financial position of a farmer does not permit him or her to survive that downfall. And so what is needed is almost a guarantee mechanism so that the farmer can complete the transition to more sustainable practices. And the guarantee mechanism ensures that he or she actually successfully gets to the end of that transition because of the length of the duration of the shift. Those propositions can be made, and they require collective action to provide them, and they require new types of solutions to finance them. That's what we're getting our work in carved out as a cooperative bank, by creating funds like that enable individual SMEs to benefit from the collective guarantees that provides. Let me close out with one thought, that as we're now in the middle of the toughest cycle of Corona, with the second waves hitting most of the European countries, if not the world, this is also the phase when the government actions have had their longest stay, and governments are being harder and harder to sustain these supports of SMEs into the end of the second wave of Corona. And none or hardly any of these support mechanisms by government have incentives in them to continue the SME on the course to the Sustainable Development Goals. I think this is a time when we need to push and support governments in saying, sustain the support of SMEs, but more importantly, also link that support to the move towards more sustainable development goals, so that the SMEs can continue to be the frontier and can pursue this with using science-based targets as they pursue it. That's what our mission is that's what we want to do as a cooperative, but I think we need to do it collectively when we move ahead in the years ahead, which will be crucial for the shift to achieve Paris. Thank you very much, Steve. That's where I wanted to take it, and maybe we have questions that I can respond to if there's any need for that.
Thank you very much, Viva. That was fantastic. We have some questions that have come in, although I think you've brilliantly managed to address most of the points. So I'm going to jump the queue. I have one that sort of relates to one of the questions that did come regarding the risk profile. I think that was a very interesting point that you made, and I'm curious to your views on whether the relationship between the lower risk profile and a small company's engagement around sustainability, whether you feel that there's a causal relationship or a correlation.
Yeah, I think there is a causal relationship. First of all, when you look at the first point I made about growth, and you would now do a data analysis on the economy, you see there is more growth in areas where the SDGs are involved, and SMEs jumping on that wave have a bigger likelihood to succeed in the years to come. And if they have a bigger likelihood to succeed, they have a lower risk of falling out. And the ones that don't have a bigger risk to fall out. So there's a causal relationship between the upside of being involved in SDGs and the downside of the risk of not succeeding in the next 5 years. That is where the causality works. I think the other part of the causality is if you have entrepreneurs that have their eye on the horizon, have a vision or have a point of view where they want to go, typically the SDGs is a reference point that triggers them to think ahead and to think creatively about what the needs of tomorrow are. That typically relates to a company with a profile that is more capable of surviving any phase of uncertainty. An aggressive, forward-looking entrepreneurial drive increases the likelihood of an SME to succeed. And that also has a correlation with a low risk profile. So I think there are just 2 or 3 factors that I can dream of right now, which would support the logic of them being connected and being causal relationship.
Thank you. And we'll hear more, I think, from 2 examples of that with Erwin and Mark later on. Now, just a final question, and it combines 2 of the questions that have come in, I think. The point about how can we support SMEs engaging in sustainability, and noted that a small company very rarely has dedicated people working on sustainability. And so generally, your views on where that support might come, and perhaps a bit more specifically to what are Rabobank account managers doing to support their SME clients.
Now, let me be clear up front that I think this also makes good business sense. Right? So it's not yes, it's a benevolent thing, but it's not a pure benevolent thing, so to speak. What we're doing, we're helping SMEs to understand what it takes to shift. For example, in terms of circularity, we're organizing circular economy challenges where we invite SMEs to participate and say, how about challenging your business on how to become circular? And what you do is you train them in the process of understanding what circularity stands for. You let them understand their own business in a different way from a circular point of view. And out of that comes an understanding and a step forward so that they then invest in circularity. And clearly, where this becomes also beneficial for the cooperative bank that we are, those clients then tend to be successful. They want to invest and we can help them. So by supporting these SMEs with skills, with networks, with ideas, you bring them on a different level of understanding. And as a result, you benefit also as a supplier by the business that you get from it. So I think this thing is a win-win if you think it through. And the only way to do it is by offering ideas, networks, support, because SMEs typically don't have that infrastructure nor the time to take that long-term point of view. And so I think this is the way we do it. I think it's something that can be easily done by many of the large corporates, or if not, the financial world at large.
Thank you very much, Wiebe. You've been very generous with your time and your candor. A real pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you, and I hope you stay safe and enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks again for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Okay, and now we're going to carry on with Alexander Farsan, the global lead on science-based targets for the WWF. And he's going to get a little bit more technical, but I think it's clear that there is no more serious commitment to climate change, to combating climate change, than to set a science-based target. It is the most rigorous and defendable position that any company can take in terms of what they're doing to get us out of this crisis. And so, Alexander, over to you, and I'll flip the slides for you.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve, and thanks everybody for dialing in today. Yeah, so my name is Alex Farzan. I work for WWF for just about over 2 years now, leading on behalf of WWF the Science Based Targets Initiative with some colleagues from the other partner organizations. And before that, spent quite a lot of time working for an organization in the UK called the Carbon Trust. So very much worked on implementing climate strategies for companies. So have a lot of background to the practical challenges that a lot of companies face, and particularly SMEs face because of the capacity gaps. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the concrete things that SMEs can actually do to tackle climate change and to contribute to the global transition to a net zero economy that we all know that we have to achieve. The background to this is that we all have a common goal, of course, in the Paris Agreement, limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius with best intentions of limiting to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The reality is, though, that we are far off track of that goal globally at the moment. If you project out current policies in place and commitments by states, we're more on track to over 3 degrees of warming. So there's what we call an ambition gap. There's a lack of ambition of individual actors to actually contribute to this global goal. And it's not least the role of businesses to perhaps close this ambition gap. And I'll speak a little bit about why that is the case. Next slide, please. To illustrate why the role of businesses is a particular one in the climate crisis, we'll play a little bit of a game. This is a snapshot of Fifth Avenue, New York, on 2 different Easter mornings, just 13 years apart. And the game that we play is Spot the Car. And on the left side, you actually need a visual aid for this, and it's helpfully provided. There's a red circle around the only car in the picture, and all the other vehicles are actually horse-drawn carriages. And then on the right side, you have that very same street in, at that time, the largest city in the world, and you, of course, no longer need a visual aid. There's no longer any horse-drawn carriages, it's all cars. And I think that illustrates really well why businesses have a particular role to play in the climate crisis. On the one hand, of course, because businesses are responsible for a majority of global emissions. And this really illustrates very nicely how the fossil fuel economy has been spread into every corner of our world. But I think there's actually an even more interesting lesson from these pictures. And that's the sheer ability of businesses to drive innovation and then to deploy those innovations at scale at breathtaking pace. If you think about it, within 13 years, within the largest city of the world, the dominant mode of transport for hundreds of years has been completely displaced with a new and better technology. And this is the power of businesses, innovation and scale. So the question is, how can we take this engine of innovation and of scale and point in the right direction and make sure that businesses are part of the solution rather than part of the problem? And we can already see what's happening when you take this engine and point in the right direction. Next slide, please. These are some of, it's a brief overview of the development of the costs of different low carbon technologies over just the last decade, coming from Bloomberg New Energy Finance. And without going into too much detail, what's striking is that over just 10 years, the price of solar PV modules has increased by 94%, the price of wind turbines by 57%, and the price of lithium-ion batteries by 85%. And what's interesting is that from these underlying learning rates that have underpinned this development of cost, we know that this is not the end of a trend. We're continuing to see these price decreases. And among the three of them, between the three of these technologies, they are sufficient to decarbonize our power system. So it's really critical to understand that we already are seeing the transition and what the transition can look like if businesses start deploying their innovation and scaling apparatus to be part of the solution. And you are seeing that leading businesses are embracing this. Next slide, please. IKEA, for example, has dedicated itself or committed itself to reduce the emissions embedded in an average product. And that means emissions from the supply chain, from all the products and goods and services that they buy, through production and end of life, by 70% by 2030. And this means they're working with the designers, with their customers, and they're also working with their suppliers to drive these emission reductions, because it's not something a business can individually deliver. These big reductions across the life cycle of a product really need to be delivered in collaboration. Next slide, please. Levi's, the largest denim brand in the world, similarly has committed to reduce its direct emissions by 90% and its value chain emissions. So again, the entire supply chain and the end of life products by 40% by 2025. Next slide, please. And Walmart, the largest retailer in the world, has committed to working with its supply chain to reduce 1 gigaton of emissions from its suppliers by 2030. What all these ambitious commitments have in common is that they were developed under the umbrella of science-based targets. Next slide, please. And it's this idea of science-based targets, of greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, that are actually informed by what climate science tells us is required to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, that the SBTi champions. The Science-Based Targets Initiative is a cooperation between CDP, the UN Global Compact, the World Resources Institute, and us at WWF. And we're developing methods, tools, and guidance for companies to set these science-based targets to help them understand how much do they need to reduce their emissions to contribute their share to the Paris goals. We promote science-based targets as a powerful tool to future-proof your business growth by decoupling it from emissions and carbon intensity. And we do so on the one hand directly with companies, but we also work with the wider ecosystem. That means with investors. Rabobank, for example, is quite engaged with the Science-Based Targets Initiative, but we also work with regulators and through global supply chains to ensure that everybody sets a science-based target. And the idea really is that science-based targets become standard business practice. And finally, we have an independent assurance mechanism for science-based targets. That means we validate the targets of companies, the climate targets, and whether they are actually science-based. So we have a catalog of criteria and a sort of certification process where we confirm that companies' targets are credible. And we've been making a lot of progress towards this goal of making science-based targets a standard business practice. Next slide, please. Since we're founded just before the climate conference in Paris in 2015, over 1,000 companies have joined the Science-Based Targets Initiative from over 50 sectors, so really in all different parts of the economy, and in over 60 countries. So it's becoming a truly global movement of businesses showing leadership and supporting the low carbon transition. And we have around 1,000 companies that have committed to the Science-Based Targets Initiative, and over 500 of them have already gotten their targets validated. So a lot of momentum behind the idea. And if you look on the right, you can actually see that the pace of adoption is accelerating. So we're not just continuing to grow, we're growing ever faster. Next slide, please. So why are companies setting these science-based targets? What is it that drives them to take this step of setting targets? Don't take our word for it. We actually went out and asked executives at those companies that have set science-based targets, what do they see as the advantage or the benefits of having set a science-based target? And you have an overview of the survey results here, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail around some of them. I think one that is incredibly important is that science-based targets drive innovation. So over 2/3 of the executives actually confirmed that lifting their gaze towards these long-term ambitious targets, understanding what's required, where do I need to get to, has really changed how companies have been thinking about how to deliver value to customers and how they do or do not have to link that to carbon intensity. So once you start lifting your gaze from these incremental improvements to where you need to get to, it's just a paradigm shift that really leads you to consider other solutions and to really shape your strategy in a way that lets you understand what's enough and really prepares you for the low carbon economy of the future. To maybe hark back to the pictures that I showed earlier, horse carriage manufacturers probably didn't have a great beginning of the 20th century. And that's because there was a transition that they did not see coming. So very rarely is there an opportunity to actually see a disruption come so far in advance. But we already know that this disruption of a low carbon economy is going to happen. So it's a luxury to be able to prepare for it by setting science-based targets and by anticipating where the economy of the future is going to be. There's a lot of support from investors for making this transition because of this risk element that I just mentioned. So investors tend to be really supportive and actually even demanding of science-based targets for companies. And you can see that over half of the companies said that investor confidence in their company has been boosted by having science-based targets in place. There's, of course, a big element of brand reputation. And that, on the one hand, is really kind of making it more recognizable that you are a company that understands its responsibilities towards society. But it's also a real competitive advantage to have these targets in place. Because as you've seen, the big brands that we all are very familiar with, the IKEAs, the Walmarts, they have set these ambitious targets for not only their direct emissions, but for the emissions of the supply chain. So if you can demonstrate to these customers that you are taking action, it actually means that you're helping them achieve their targets. And you're increasingly seeing that supplier contracts start being shaped around these environmental performance benchmarks. And then finally, there is bottom line savings, because for most companies, actually saving a ton of carbon means you're saving energy costs. When I was working in the UK, on average, we said a ton of carbon saved will save 200 pounds of energy costs. So there's a real opportunity here to cut costs from your bottom line by doing the right thing. Next slide, please. So how do you actually set a science-based target? Essentially, this is what I call science-based target setting 101. It's a three-step process. The first step is trying to understand what is the global carbon budget that we're working with. And what it means is that climate science actually tells us that to limit global warming to a certain temperature, say 1.5 degrees Celsius, we have a reasonably good understanding of how much more we can emit, how much more greenhouse gas we can add to the atmosphere before that goal becomes out of reach. And this amount we call a carbon budget. So understanding how much is left in that budget is the first step. And we derive that directly from climate scenarios developed by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or collated by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The second step then is to try and understand how much of that budget is actually my business entitled to. What is the fair share of my business from this global carbon budget? And for that, we have different methods for the allocation, different allocation mechanisms. And if you are interested in that, there's a lot of detail we have around this on our website. And then finally, the last step is, once you understand the slice or the share of the budget that your business is entitled to, how does it compare to your current performance? And how quickly do you have to reduce your emissions to actually stay within that budget, to have made your contributions to the global warming goals? So why is it so critical for SMEs to take climate action? Next slide, please. I think the speaker before me has already done a great job of setting out the critical nature of SMEs, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. But one piece, of course, is that the whole economy needs to act. These global goals are reflective of having to overhaul the entire economy. The way we generate value and we generate prosperity needs to be disconnected from the use of fossil fuels and carbon intensity. And it only works if the whole economy moves along. And because SMEs make such a huge share of the global economy, this can only work, can only really solve climate change if all companies move along, including SMEs. For the SMEs themselves, as I mentioned, cutting carbon also cuts costs. So in a really difficult time as we see at the moment, being able to cut your underlying cost base is actually a competitive advantage and supports your long-term viability as a business. And finally, as I also already set out, larger companies are really looking to their suppliers to collaborate with them and drive these emission reductions. So increasingly, this is going to become a driver of business, being able to demonstrate that you understand the challenge and that you're going to help your customers fulfill their climate goals is going to become a competitive advantage in the marketplace. Next slide, please. So what do SMEs actually have to do to set science-based targets? Well, first step is to measure your carbon footprint. And what is usually used for this is a standard, an accounting standard called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, developed by our colleagues at the Wolf Resources Institute. And it separates out emissions into 3 different buckets, scopes, as we call it. And you're basically measuring your scope 1 emissions, which is direct emissions from your operations, so fossil fuels you combust within your operations, or the vehicles that you own, or also perhaps process emissions, depending on what exactly the nature of your business is. Then there's scope 2 emissions, which are essentially linked to your electricity consumption. So all the carbon intensity of electricity you purchase will be reflected in your scope 2 footprint. And for these 2 areas, excuse me, for these 2 areas, really the main thing to understand is what are my energy bills? As soon as you understand what energy you consume, either in terms of fuels or in terms of electricity, there are emission factors. In the UK, for example, DEFRA provides these, by which you can multiply your energy consumption, and you get a good understanding of what the carbon impact is. And then there's the whole wider area of scope 3 emissions, which really covers the entire rest of your value chain that you're part of. So it will include the emissions embedded in the goods and services that you purchase. It will include the logistics of bringing these goods and services to your business and potentially moving your goods that you produce to your customers. It will include things like business travel. It will include things like the end-of-life treatment of those goods. And as you can already tell, this is a much more complex world where it is not enough to just have your energy bills. And this is an area where a lot of companies need to invest quite a bit of time to actually understand what is it that I need to measure, where do I get the data for this, how can I affect those. First step for SMEs really is to just measure scope 1 and 2 emissions. And then there's some tools available. For example, on the Greenhouse Gas Protocol website, there is a scope 3 evaluator that lets you do like a heat map of your scope 3 footprint and lets you understand, okay, I buy a certain amount of steel. Steel is a quite carbon intensive good. It's likely that this is one of the key areas where I can make an impact. You don't necessarily need to look at all these areas if you're an SME. Next slide, please. So the next step, once you've understood what your footprint is to set a target. And for SMEs, the SBTi actually launched a more streamlined way of setting these targets, acknowledging that as compared to a company like IKEA, where they have large in-house sustainability expert teams, that is really not likely to be the case in many of the SMEs around the world. So it's important to make it accessible for SMEs to set these targets without needing to spend a lot of time on calculating targets and spending a lot of time on the analysis piece. It's more important that SMEs get to action. So we have a target setting letter where SMEs can choose among pre-made options for for scope 1 and 2 targets, so for these energy consumption related targets. And then, as opposed to these larger companies, SMEs are asked to measure and reduce their scope 3 emissions, but it's not required to set a hard target. So again, it's expected that SMEs think about what their key impact areas are, and there are tools to help them with this. But the workload of really tracking in detail the emissions around all these areas, we do not expect that from all SMEs, but of course, they are very welcome. So the key thing really is that you measure your footprint, you commit to the SBTi and set a target by using our target setting letter. And then, of course, comes the third step, which is, next slide, please, to start reducing your emissions in line with this. And there's a number of different tools available, and I don't have a lot of time to go into detail all of them. I would refer you to the SME Climate Hub that was launched just a couple of months ago, where the International Chamber of Commerce and a few other partners are actually trying to help businesses, and particularly SMEs, understand which tools are available to make these emission reductions, where should we prioritize, et cetera, et cetera. That is already all I wanted to cover today. I'm sure there'll be some questions later, but I hope that gives everybody a kind of a high-level understanding of why science-based targets are so important, why it's so important that SMEs are part of the movement, and what are the key steps that we have to go through to really take action.
Thanks very much, Alex. That was perfect. And yes, already we have a number of questions. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to review those while we hear from Sanda and from Erwin and Mark. And Erwin and Mark, I would encourage you to also have a scan at those questions, because I think your views on those would also be very valuable. So now, I'm delighted that we were able to get the global CEO and executive director of UN Global Compact to prepare a statement for us. And so without any further ado, we're going to get that playing. There we go.
Greetings from New York. I'm Sanda Ojiambo, the CEO and Executive Director of the United Nations Global Compact. It is my pleasure to join you at this important forum today. Let me begin by greeting my fellow speakers, Wiebe Dreyer from Rabobank, Alexander Farson from WWF, and Linda van Beek from our Global Compact local network in the Netherlands. Now, before they join the discussion, I would like to talk about our common interest in joining the global fight against climate change. Small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, will play a critical role in that fight. According to the World Bank, they account for about 90% of businesses and half of employment worldwide. SMEs also comprise more than 60% of the 11,000 businesses participating in the UN Global Compact. Much of the public and regulatory pressure to cut carbon emissions is being exerted on the world's largest emitters. They are, after all, most responsible for driving climate change. However, halting the climate crisis will require action from every individual and every enterprise. And while there are certainly costs involved in measuring, monitoring, and managing emissions, there are also clear financial opportunities in reducing them. Improvements in energy efficiency can deliver attractive returns on investment for companies of all sizes.
I'm experiencing technical difficulties here. I'm very sorry. I'm not sure about a solution. I think what we should do now is move on to Linda. Linda, I hope you are ready, and I'll try and get this fixed, and we'll come back to Sanda in just a minute. I'm not able to change my, oh, there we go. Now that's gone. At least we have the right background. Over to you, Linda, and then we'll try and come back to Sanda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Good morning, everybody. It's great that you are here today at our event, How European SMEs Can Contribute to a Green Recovery. Why is a green recovery such importance? The COVID-19 pandemic and the way how we responded to it showed the intertwining of business and society. It also showed the intertwining of several global challenges, the potential impact of companies on these challenges and vice versa. Also, like Wiebe Dreyer explained, consumers and investors want businesses to take responsibility for global challenges. In the Netherlands, several organizations joined forces together to call for a sustainable recovery from COVID-19. We have published together the Green Recovery Statement. Almost 400 companies in the Netherlands have signed this statement. And one of the key messages is that we are asking the government to stimulate and facilitate the measures on the issue of climate change. Today, we have brought together a diverse group of European SMEs to catalyze engagement with the business ambition for the 1.5 degrees campaign and inspire them to set science-based climate targets. We hope to motivate the participating companies today to give a follow-up on this issue after the event. 13 and 14 October 2021, the Making Global Goals Local Business Summit in the Netherlands will be organized by UN Global Compact and Global Compact Network Netherlands. During this event, we will catalyze new partnerships and we will explore solutions to drive action on key sustainable development issues. You are welcome to attend this summit, so please save the date, 13 and 14 October 2021. This business summit will take place 3 weeks before the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow. The summit will serve as a platform to show increased ambition by business, investors, cities, and other non-state actors to transition from a grey to green economy. Business leaders and investors have a critical role to play in advocating for governments to urgently match their climate ambition. It's our goal to have many of the SMEs present here today attend the Making Global Goals Local Business event in 2021. With ambitious climate targets and to take the needed measures for this transition. You can be part of a leading group of SMEs showing governments around the world that not only multinational corporations, but also small and medium-sized enterprises are expecting governments to match efforts to combat climate change. You can be part of a group of SMEs that are taking their own responsibility to contribute to the climate change issue. We will offer an interesting program with contributions by business leaders, impact-driven entrepreneurs, NGOs, government experts, and the United Nations. Looking forward to see you there. Back to you, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Let's just take a moment and try to pick up with Sanda again. But Erwin, I would ask you to be, oh, sorry, no, it's Mark is next. Mark, I'd ask you to be prepared in case that isn't working. And we're gonna carry on back to you. And early indicators are that it is not responding. So Mark, I'm going to ask you to start, and I'm going to get that slide up behind just as soon as I can, but unfortunately my PowerPoint has frozen, so I can't do that. Mark, are you able to?
Yeah, for sure. Do you want to go on to the next slide?
Yeah, I wish I could, but
oh, you can't. Okay, don't worry.
It's frozen, so I'm gonna try and fix it so we get it on before you finish talking.
Okay, perfect. So, hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Cadigan. I am the CEO of Ella's Kitchen, which is the UK's #1 baby food company and a brand that is available in 30 countries, over 30 countries around the world. I absolutely love working at Ella's Kitchen. I feel very honored to lead such a passionate and engaged team. Along with 500 other certified B corporations, we announced at COP25 our ambition to be a net zero business by 2030. In addition to this, we are setting externally approved science-based targets for direct and indirect emissions across scopes 1, 2, and 3, as defined to the GHG protocol. Glad I can say that after Alexander's talk on the importance of setting science-based targets. We're also working with UK and international conservation partners to restore, rewild, and protect the ecosystems on which we all rely. I'm often asked why. Like, why are we spending so much time, so much effort, and so much expense as a business? And to be honest, I think it was Barack Obama that said we're the first generation of leaders that will not be able to look back and say, we didn't know. That excuse is gone. And I actually get quite frustrated when I'm asked why we're doing this, as I don't feel that I and we have a choice. As a parent, as a leader, I know what needs to be done. I don't need the government or governments to lead the way. I don't need our government in the UK to legislate in order for me to do what I consider to be the right thing. You know, we are a baby food company and we feel it's our responsibility, our duty, I would say actually in fact, to ensure that our current consumers actually have a future. I've had to stop watching climate programs. I think you've got this picture here. These are my two kids dropping them off in September at school for the first time. I've had to stop watching climate programs like David Attenborough's recent one called Extinction: The Facts with my two girls, as it was too upsetting to them. And they just keep asking two questions, you know, why is this happening and what are we going to do about it? Well, this is the what for me. I'm a passionate advocate of people using their business as a force for good. Business can and indeed has to be part of the solution. And I'm proud to lead one that is making these commitments. I also believe, and maybe we'll get into this discussion, that we need to be brave and reimagine what the very purpose of a business is, as it cannot surely just be about making money. And I believe this is going to be critical to us in hitting the UN targets. For us, achieving net zero is going to be very, very challenging. And we know we're going to have some very tricky conversations with ourselves. But we all have a part to play in this so we can deliver the future all children deserve. And that is me for now.
Thanks very much, Mark. Much appreciated. And we'll be coming back to you in the Q&A. So everyone, if you have questions for Mark, would like to learn more about how his company is contributing to the fight on climate change, then please do type your questions into the Q&A. Now, we're going to carry on to Erwin to share his experience, and then we'll come back to the Sanda video after that. So Erwin, over to you, please.
Yes, well, good morning. You deactivated my camera as far as I get the message here. So maybe you can, let's see. Do you hear me?
Yes, can hear you okay. Don't know about the camera. Maybe that's something. There we go.
I think now you deactivated. Yes, now it should work. Do you see me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay,
perfect.
Good. So, well, thank you very much. Good morning to the audience. My name is Erwin Kojans, and I'm the CEO of NUNNER Logistics. In order to understand what I will talk about, I briefly inform you about what NUNNER Logistics is. We are an asset-light logistics service provider offering transport via all modes, and we also manage big warehouses. Today, I talk to you about our firm's commitment to the United Nations Global Compact initiatives to influence the climate change. It is our strong belief that without participation of the logistics industry, we will not be able to limit the global temperature in the next decades. Transportation activities like air, ocean, rail, and road freight are responsible for approximately 70% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. And also the way of how you supply the energy to warehouses can make a very big difference. In the Netherlands, we have already 39 million of square meters of warehouses, and therefore also energy is how you create the energy for your warehouse is let's say a big game changer. For example, yeah, okay, I come to that later. So in addition to contributing to reducing the temperature, we have already since many years the intrinsic belief that as a company we must contribute to clean air, clean water, and a clean earth. And this is not something recent, so this is already this is in our DNA since actually since the 80s of the last century. We have formulated some very ambitious goal, namely that we aim to set up a zero carbon supply chain for our clients within the next 5 years. And this sounds as a very ambitious goal, but without ambition, we do not get anywhere. So it will be, of course, depending on how technology will develop further. But we believe that we can really make big steps in the coming years. Currently, some of our mega warehouses are equipped with solar roofs, and yeah, as a result, some of these buildings produce more energy actually than they consume. So as an example, our warehouse in Venlo that has a solar roof of 120,000 square meters that heats, for example, 4,500 houses in the Venlo region. Well, actually, since NUNNER is an asset-light company, we do not own trucks, ships, airplanes, and the like. We purchase all transport that we deploy from our subcontractors. And because we have this concept, we can always enter into commitments with the parties that are furthest in their technical development. The fact is that long distance transport by road, in particular, cannot be carried out by carbon-free trucks in a cost-efficient manner at this moment. The purchase of an electric heavy truck is about 3 times more than a comparable diesel engine. So, but there are some steps made, and hopefully in a couple of years, these prices will come closer together. However, city distribution and short-haul transport is currently already largely carried out by NUNNER Logistics with electrical powered vehicles. As of next year, 21, NUNNER Logistics will also join the Science-Based Targets Initiative of United Nations Global Compact. Linda touched it briefly in the previous session, because NUNNER wants to be a front runner in the low carbon economy. Actually, also from our experience, we have found out that climate initiatives enable us also to create significant advantages to the market and in the market. Because as a sustainable service provider with a proven reputation for providing climate-friendly transportation, we gain access to new markets and customer segments. Many of our customers now ask for emission data as part of their request for tenders. Unfortunately, customers' willingness to pay more for sustainable transportation and services is not yet there where we like it to be. But it is obvious that the sustainable approach brings us really new commercial opportunities. In addition, sustainable companies and employees like we feel they are more motivated, engaged in their work, and actually that also is enhancing their effectiveness. And also a last advantage that we see is that due to the fact that we operate in the way that we do, it's much easier for us to attract good, high-skilled, high-caliber employees, which is actually also a cost saving. We do because we do not have to pay a lot to headhunters for every employee that we need, because we are, let's say, known as a very well, good brand in the market as it goes for sustainability. And the current new generation on the market really loves to work in such companies. So, well, that's my contribution. Thank you very much. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask.
Thanks very much, Erwin. That's fantastic. I really appreciate you bringing in the point about the importance of being sustainable in getting competitive advantage in hiring the best talent, because that, of course, is so critical in competitive advantage more generally. Now, we're going to bypass my computer problems, and Marco, let's switch over to you to go back to the video of Sanda. While that's playing, though, I urge Erwin, Mark, Linda, and Alex to think about some of the questions that are appearing in the Q&A box, and as soon as Sanda's done, we'll dive into those. Okay, Sanda, over to you.
Greetings from New York. I'm Sanda Ojiambo, the CEO and Executive Director of the United Nations Global Compact. It is my pleasure to be in forum today. Let me begin by greeting my fellow speakers, Wiebe Dreyer from Rabobank, Alexander Farson from WWF, and Linda van Beek from our Global Compact local network in the Netherlands. Now, before they join the discussion, I would like to talk about our common interest in joining the global fight against climate change. Small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, will play a critical role in that fight. According to the World Bank, they account for about 90% of businesses and half of employment worldwide. SMEs also comprise more than 60% of the 11,000 businesses participating in the UN Global Compact. Much of the public and regulatory pressure to cut carbon emissions is being exerted on the world's largest emitters. They are, after all, most responsible for driving climate change. However, halting the climate crisis will require action from every individual and every enterprise. And while there are certainly costs involved in measuring, monitoring, and managing emissions, there are also clear financial opportunities in reducing them. Improvements in energy efficiency can deliver attractive returns on investment for companies of all sizes. Investments in renewable energy and electric vehicles, for example, can cut emissions now and diminish the cost of more stringent climate policies later. I urge SMEs to help tackle climate change by setting ambitious targets for reduced carbon emission. The Science Based Targets Initiative has developed a streamlined route that makes targeting straightforward, even for small enterprises. The UN Global Compact is also here to help. All these participants have made a commitment to adopt responsible policies under our 10 principles for human rights, labor, the environment, and anti-corruption. By embracing these principles, they are also actively supporting the drive to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And while the world has taken great strides towards some of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, sadly, progress on others has stalled or even reversed. But one thing is certain: we simply cannot afford to hit pause on tackling the climate emergency and its irreversible impact on people and planet. At the same time, however, we confront a global pandemic that is devastating lives and livelihoods, disrupting supply chains, deepening inequalities, and undoing our work on sustainability. In response to this dual crisis, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is urging governments to work together for a green recovery from the impact of COVID-19, an accelerated transition to a clean energy future. Responsible companies are already working towards such a recovery. So far, more than 300 have joined one especially dynamic effort, the Business Ambition for 1.5 degrees. In the lead up to the COP26 climate conference next year, this campaign invites visionary leaders to commit their companies to science-based emission targets aligned with limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees and reaching net zero emissions. Business Ambition for 1.5 is led by the Science Based Targets Initiative in close partnership with the UN Global Compact and the We Mean Business Coalition. The campaign is backed by a broad coalition of businesses, governments, NGOs, and the UN. But now we need the number of companies involved to swell from hundreds to thousands, and fast. What we do not need is a false choice between a livable planet and a healthy global economy. On the contrary, taking climate action is the best way to build more resilient businesses, communities, and societies. Around the world, ambitious corporate leaders are sending strong market signals by scaling innovations up and carbon emissions down. They are aligning business strategies with a 1.5-degree pathway, not only because it is good for the environment, but because it is good for business. At this historic moment, I urge you to join Business Ambition for 1.5. We truly can recover better together. I'm confident that we will. The UN Global Compact is here to work with you, side by side, in the business of uniting business for a better world. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanda. Thank you, Marco. Okay, now, just in case you're only looking at Erwin's empty chair. Oh, he's back. Excellent. Hi, Erwin. If you click up on the right-hand corner of your screen, you can opt into gallery view, and then you'll be able to see all of our speakers. Oh, except me. Let me get back on there. Excellent. And so Q&A, and we have some great ones have come in, and I think I'd like to dive right in with one from Jan that I had already written down that I wanted to ask as well. So maybe we'll start with you, Mark, and then Erwin with the same question, but Alex and Linda, very interested to hear your experience with other companies around this. And that is just, what was the key challenge that you're facing around becoming, how do we want to phrase it? Jan said carbon neutral, but obviously that's not the same as setting a science-based target or net zero. So maybe let's just say your biggest climate challenge, and what are you struggling with the most, or struggled with the most? So Mark first, if you don't mind.
I'd pick out a couple. The first one is that the vast majority, I think most businesses will have this issue. The vast majority of our emissions are outside of our direct control. So they are in scope 3, and they are with co-manufacturers who produce our products for us. So I don't own those factories. So for us to make the reductions that we need, for some of those factories, we are a very small percentage of their sales, of their business. So it becomes a sales job on our part to go to these factories to ask them to make the reductions that we need. We've measured all of our emissions across scope 1, 2, and 3, and we need to reduce our emissions by about 50–55%. That's quite a tall order when the vast majority aren't in our direct control. So I would say that's the biggest challenge that we've got coming at us. Other challenges which are in our direct control will be, because we know this because we've measured it, again, one of the big things we need to look at is the type of products that we produce. And as baby food, we need to look at whether we take meat out of our products, because that's a huge contributor to our emissions. That's going to be a clash up against our mission, because our mission is all about children's health and nutrition, and in parts of Europe, propagating a plant-based vegan weaning diet, so for kids when they first start food, is illegal. So it's going to be this interesting clash, I suppose, between our net zero commitments and our commitments to children, and where we net out, no pun intended. I'm not quite sure at the moment, but I would say our biggest challenge is the vast majority is outside of our direct control.
Which gives you a very nice segue over to Erwin, because I assume having access to suppliers that share your values vis-a-vis climate is a real win. And if you can choose a logistics provider who's also part of the 1.5 campaign, then that takes some of the pressure off, at least in that area. So
Yeah, that is
Erwin.
That is correct. So actually, we work in different ways. So first of all, we drive our current suppliers to invest actually in sustainable solutions, and that can also be the highest standard in the highest Euro standard, I would say, in diesel engines, which are lowering emission, but also let's say for city distribution in the so-called electrical vehicles. On the long haulage, we encourage our transporters, or we select transporters who are also experimenting with LNG, the liquid natural gas. And these are all ways for us to reduce the total carbon emission that we actually produce. And being asset light is actually giving us the opportunity to switch very quickly to new technologies.
So I'd like to ask you a follow-up question just before coming to Alex and Linda on this, around electric vehicles, particularly electric heavy goods vehicles, and how do you see, because I know this is a huge challenge for many companies, is how they're going to decarbonize their logistics, and how do you see us getting there? You said you thought the cost of large heavy lorries, heavy trucks would come down over the course of the next few years. Usually, a key driver for that is scale. As more people are buying electric vehicles, the costs are coming down. But as you noted, the cost of these large trucks is so high, it doesn't seem that anyone's buying them. What do you see as the driver that's going to get us to those more affordable vehicles in the near term? Clearly, demand is building and building. Do you think we'll just at some point people will be willing to pay the price, or is there something that's going to bring the cost down?
Actually, I'm not a technologist, so but what could bring the price down is indeed technology. So that means if they can produce or manufacture cheaper batteries, and this is a trend which is going on already since several years. But you could also think of let's say that there is a kind of induction on the highways that will be able to give the energy to the trucks. Well, these are also articles that I read, so that you do not need to fill the truck every time with electricity, but that it is loading itself during the journey. Solar cells is not really an option, so because the solar cells on the roof of a trailer that looks nice, but it is not giving a lot of energy, lot of energy to drive. These will be the kind of invention that we were looking at, and probably subsidies from governments, these kind of things. Because there we, let's say, with the smaller trucks, which are also more expensive, there you are able to convince your customer to pay a little bit more, or of course you have less cost of energy. But for the long haulage, we really need some breakthrough decisions or technology.
Thank you. Linda, in your experience with working with many companies, does this all ring true? Are there other examples of challenges that you're seeing that are being overcome for smaller companies in the climate space?
Yes, what we see is that many companies want to become climate neutral. They want to have impact on the SDGs, and it all starts with ambition. But then they find it difficult to translate it to their operations, especially for SMEs. There are so many tools, measures you can take. Sometimes it's difficult to select the right ones and to find your way. So I think that is challenging. Also, sometimes it can be challenging to engage your entire company in these ambitions. So as a local network of UN Global Compact, what we do is we try to offer knowledge tools to help these companies. For example, in January, we will start with the rollout of the SDG ambition. This is about all the SDGs, but of course also on climate. And we, with this program, we will organize workshops and help companies to work on that step by step, and I think that's important. And we hope to offer some guidance.
Thanks, Linda. Alex, I imagine you face a similar challenge that we do, insofar as it's arguably easier to deal with a smaller number of really large companies than a large number of small ones, and the economics of that as service providers makes sense. So I really think it's fantastic that SBTi has made such an effort to create a special treatment for SMEs. Now, a question that I don't think you said specifically, and I suspect is on the mind of a good number of our audience members, is just how much does it cost for an SME to get accredited with a science-based target? I used to run a small business, so I know that's usually the first question.
Sure. Yeah, it's a very short answer. It's $1,000 for the certification, which is sort of like 80% reduced fee from what we charge from large companies. But yeah, it is indeed still the team that has to sort of process the whole thing. So yeah, it's $1,000.
And is that a one-off, or
it's a
what
one-off?
Is sort of the ongoing? Are there ongoing reporting requirements and commitments that an SME has to make once they've started down this road?
We ask the SME to report progress against its targets on an annual basis, which I think if you take the target serious, you will have to do that anyways to just track progress. But that is all we're asking, and there's no long-term commitment to any fees, or there's no membership model or anything similar. We are thinking about ways or models to just provide more support, not on a for-fee basis, but just make more resources available, and also look how we can partner with others. Again, the SME Climate Hub, for example, I think is a great resource where it's still building up, but there will increasingly be tools available that would solve some of the most basic technical pieces. There's of course then the bigger questions that I think Mark highlighted very well about the sort of strategic tensions that might show up at a certain point. And I think that's really where I would say the biggest lift is for a lot of companies, is that historically this was sort of environmental health and safety reporting and sort of like a back office support function. And you're starting to see that if you take this serious in terms of the level of ambition that we're talking about, and also broadening the scope to really this value chain impact, then this has to be at the heart of how you plan your business strategy. It can no longer be something that runs alongside it.
Thanks, Alex. So maybe a very specific SBTi question for Mark and Erwin, because I believe you both have set science-based targets that have been accredited, and maybe you could say a few words, hopefully not embarrassing anyone, about your experience with the SBTi, the process, and did you get value from going through that exercise of actually getting that accreditation? Does it carry more weight than just simply saying you're carbon neutral or committed to climate change to have that piece of paper? Maybe Mark, you could start.
We are in the process of setting them at the moment. So we've measured everything, scope 1, 2, and 3. We are putting in place science-based targets kind of as we speak. So I can't quite answer that question at the moment. As to their importance, I think they are important. And actually, if you'd asked me a year ago, I was all for us being carbon neutral as a business and thought that was the gold standard until I was taught that actually it wasn't the gold standard. We need to be net zero. And here's me as, you know, CEO thinking I understood a lot about this side of the business. So yeah, it's a process for us, but we will be there in the next couple of months having set them. But yeah, they are important.
Erwin, did you?
Yeah, well, actually, we are in more or less the same situation like what Mark described. So I told during my session that NUNNER, as of 2021, will implement this science-based target initiatives. Currently, we have, I would say, also a rather sophisticated in-house developed system of, let's say, creating a baseline of several years ago, which is very well adopted in the market as a very, let's say, reliable and also, how you call it, integral tool. But due to the fact that we get now something offered, which is apparently, well, it is actually creating the same baseline for everybody, which makes it, I would say, more comparable with other companies. We really embrace this idea of having one system of, well, let's say, of measuring. So yeah, we will implement it. Yeah, we already contact about it with the GNC in the Netherlands.
Steve, can I just say one thing, just agreeing with Alexander? Our commitment to net zero now for the first time really sits front and center of our overall strategy. So we only have one strategy now as a business. We have 3 pillars to that strategy, and net zero is one of them. And it feeds down to every single person in the business.
Well, that connects back very nicely back to our opening presentation from Wiebe as well, and just the importance that other actors place on seeing that, and how important it is that this commitment to sustainability is central, and that bankers and other customers recognize that, and that it translates into making for a stronger business. Now, we're out of time. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you all. I'd like you just to note the UN Global Compact has local networks, not just in the Netherlands and the UK, but in 69 countries around the world. So wherever you operate, there's a very good chance that there's a local network there to support you. The UN Global Compact is a partner in the Science Based Targets Initiative, and this 1.5 degree campaign is again central to the work that we're doing. Please do get in touch if you need any help with this. We'd love to work with you. Thank you very much to Mark and Erwin and Linda and Alex and Wiebe and Sanda for participating today. Thank you all for your attention. It's been a pleasure working with you all, and I wish you a great rest of the day. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you, everyone.